Hey friends, welcome to Canadian Cutting Edge University. This is my series of courses where I try to teach you something or at least share some information about something. You know, it's not a review and it's generally something to do with sharpening. Now, I had a question from one of my viewers and actually had some telephone conversations with him about an issue with creating a burr and not being able to feel it. And you know, he'd been sharpening some knives, or at least one knife, so much that he had used up a lot of the steel of the blade. Well, for me, a lot is anything more than is absolutely necessary. I like to sharpen as efficiently as possible, meaning I take off as little steel as I need to so that the knife will last as long as possible. Now, this gentleman was having difficulty feeling the burr, and so he kept on sharpening, and that makes complete sense because so many people have been teaching how important it is to feel the burr. Yeah, that is important, but what if you're not feeling it even though you're creating it, and then you're just chewing up more and more of the blade than you need to? I had an idea for him. He's tried it out since, and now I'm going to share it with you guys. So I've got a knife here to demonstrate what I want to show you, and it really doesn't matter what kind of knife it is, if it's, you know, like this, you know, Western style Tanto, or if it's a recurve or whatever. It's just the way to explain it to you. There's a main bevel on a knife, and that's the big side of the knife. And then there's the apex bevel. So that's that one where the light's dancing back and forth as I move it. That's also known as the sharpening bevel. Now, one thing that you've probably been taught that's a good idea, especially for novices, is that you mark off the bevel and you put some blue, you know, this is a permanent marker, along that edge. That way, when you're sharpening across it, not using your finger, of course, but your sharpening stone, or if you're doing hand sharpenings, what I'm trying to teach you applies if you're, you know, whetstone sharpener, or if you're a guided sharpening system where you've, you know, clamped it onto something and you're guiding the stone. Both work, although you have to manually lift up the knife and take a look at it in more detail if you're doing the whetstone hand sharpening method. But still, the point is, you put that across the main bevel so that you know when you've removed the steel. Also, if you're trying to match the angle, you're doing that. Now, here's my knife substitute. This is the main bevel up here, you know, with that squiggly line. And that line across is equivalent to this. So the point that you want to do when you're sharpening is you want to remove steel evenly all the way across that blue edge. Once you're doing that, you know you're removing steel. But how do you know if you're creating a burr? If, you know, you're trying to feel for it, rubbing your hand backwards away from the apex, sometimes you can feel a burr with your fingers. Now, it could be some people might have fingers that aren't as sensitive as others, nerve damage, whatever. For whatever reason, sometimes some people have a difficulty feeling the burr. The other reason could be the type of steel. Different steel creates different size burrs. And of course, different stones that you're sharpening with create burrs differently. And how you're using the stone, there's so many variables on the burr that I don't really rely on the burr all that much anymore. I just make sure that I'm taking steel off of this entire apex bevel. So all the way across this blue area. Now, I don't mark it up every time anymore. I hardly ever do that. But for a novice, that's important to do because then you can learn to recognize when you're doing it right. Now, the thing I suggested to this gentleman, instead of just wasting an awful lot of steel, because once you've taken that off, you no longer know how much you've done, I suggested to create a little bit of a very thin line across the edge of the main bevel. The reason for that is, so you don't do this part with the squiggly edge, but you just barely put, oh, that's way, way too much. But for demonstration purposes, there you go. You just put a very, very thin extra bit of ink, like that main stretch there. It's just a tiniest little bit although that's way more steel removal than I would suggest. What that means is when you're sharpening, if you're evenly sharpening all the way across, you've actually removed, that means you've removed that much steel all the way along. Now this is of course way close up, so it's not an awful lot of steel necessarily, but just the fact that when you're sharpening, if this blue line disappears, you've removed that much steel, which means you must have sharpened all the way to the apex. If you felt a burr or not is almost irrelevant in this scenario, because it doesn't matter what it feels like, you have removed that much steel, which means you've created an apex that's brand new. So unless there's, major chips out of the steel, like a major chunk missing, then you got to sharpen all the way up to, past that chunk. But if there aren't any chunks missing, just that really thin line helps you to see what you've done. That little line all the way across, way too wide here, probably too wide even here. But once you've done that, you know that you're sharpening all the way. And once you've done that, you've done it. You've created a new apex. And that's the whole point, is to create a new apex. The people that keep teaching, to create the burr aren't being wrong. They're just not sharing the real thing that you want to be creating is a new apex. That happens when you create a burr. And creating a burr is how you feel if you've created an apex or not. But you can't always feel it. So if you've had that issue with the apex, there you go. But if another thing you can try, if you've been trying to feel an apex and you don't, get some really, really light tissue paper. You can use Kleenex or whatever brand you have in your house, like blowing your nose tissue paper, or other even lighter tissue paper, and put it on your hand. Let's imagine this is the tissue paper, and slide it backwards across that edge. And if your knife doesn't have a burr on it, it won't catch. But if there's a burr, it'll catch on there and start to tear that tissue paper. It's another way to check. Hopefully that helps some of you. And if it does, please let me know in the comments down below. And if it doesn't, let me know as well. And what do you think of this series? It's I haven't done very many this year. I think the last time was like 5 months ago. I did a video on sharpening a recurve. But now it's one way to deal with the burr issue in case you can't feel the burr. Thank you so much for watching, liking, sharing, commenting, and subscribing. Those things really do make a big difference. And remember, friends, always cut towards your chum, not your thumb.